Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by recruiting analyst Dylan Callaghan-Croley as we're here coming to you following Oregon State's transfer portal edition of quarterback Javanni McCoy, committed to the Beavers just last night. Dylan and I are going to break down what the 6'2", 185-pounder brings to Corvallis. Dylan, Oregon State's been hitting the transfer portal hard for a lot of different positions, but we see them finally land a quarterback. McCoy was the guy that we reported as being on campus for a visit very early in the process. He was obviously a local kid and someone who we could tell there was some interest there. I think they chased and are still maybe chasing some bigger fish, but nevertheless, this is a quarterback that they have locked in heading into next season. Just for stability at the position, and especially given that we don't know what Ben Gulbranson's plan is next year. He said as much when we talked to him. He said he's going to evaluate things after the year, but even if he were to come back, you still would want more depth at the position. And if he doesn't come back, then you really need depth at the position. So I think they kicked the tires on a bunch of guys, Dylan, but all considering, we'll get into his stats in a minute. I kind of like McCoy in the sense that he was a under-recruited quarterback, had to go to Idaho to start his career, but really has put up, solid numbers, maybe not great, but a solid 2-to-1 interception to touchdown ratio this last year, roughly. And, he kind of got that gunslinger mentality, I would say, if I were to put it into a word. What do you kind of think about him?
No, yeah, I mean, it's obvious nothing was given to him, right? He had to go out, earn his playing time at Idaho, had to earn his way into the FBS ranks, and he did that. So good on him. But I mean, yeah, it's people are going to look at just, Idaho and be turned off by it to a degree. I get it. Idaho isn't a sexy transfer college to come from. It's not Clemson. It's not Clemson. It's not an FBS program. It's not a Power 5 program, obviously. And a couple of years ago, it was one of the worst programs in all of college football. But I think when you look at it, and now he wasn't the only guy, but what you look at is that Idaho's offense under him the last 2 years has been one of the best offenses in the entire FCS. And that comes down to the other talent on the field. That comes down to the offensive coordinator. The head coach Eck out there is, a very good offensive mind, a guy that we talk about as potential fit for the Beavers as an offensive coordinator.
Sure.
But McCoy is the key cog in what made that machine work, and the stats he posted at Idaho over the last 2 years are quite impressive. Let me see if I can pull them back up here quickly. But you look at over his 3 years at Idaho, 65.7% completion percentage, 5,800 yards, 43 touchdowns, 19 interceptions. He has gotten the job done. He's not really a dual threat quarterback. He can run a little bit. He can escape the pocket, extend plays, pick up some valuable yards on the ground. But this is a pocket passing quarterback who I think will fit into Ryan Gunderson's system very well. It's what he should fit into what they were running. I know it was Chip Kelly's offense at UCLA, but I imagine Ryan Gunderson's offense is going to be a little bit of what we've seen in the past.
It'll be similar for sure.
And then a little bit of Chip Kelly, influence built into that. I think he would be mistaken not to have some of Chip Kelly's influence in that. I know Chip Kelly's offense the last few years hasn't been what it was 10 years ago, but I also think that's because when Dorian Thompson-Robinson was there, the offense was
DTR was a great quarterback. He's still playing on Sundays, right? So that's a big piece.
Dante Moore just wasn't the quarterback that everybody thought he was coming out of high school, and I think that's the big thing there. But I think McCoy is going to be able to fit into the Beavers' offense quite well. Like I said, a pocket passer. And I'm looking. Our friends over at Pro Football Focus do a great job of breaking down stats in terms of depth, under pressure, all that. And you look, this is a kid who posted and I would say with PFF grades, they're never gospel, but they're good supplemental information. Some of them are sometimes pretty off, and you question them. Sometimes they're good. But they gave him a 94.8 passing grade this year on deep thrown attempts of 20 yards
Yeah.
per or more. 22 for 51, 694 yards, 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Out of those 22 completions, that they credit him with 20 big time throws, which is very subjective. I mean,
Sure.
what a big time throw to you and a big time throw to me may be very different. But the key thing to me is that 0 turnover worthy passes on those 51 attempts.
Yeah.
Throughout the entire season, he only had 6 turnover worthy passes as a whole.
Impressive.
It absolutely is impressive. And some people will be like, okay, how do you have 6 turnover worthy passes but 8 interceptions? Not every pass is always, the quarterback's fault when it gets intercepted.
Sure.
It bounce off a wide receiver. It could just be an incredible play by a defender. But what I see is an accurate quarterback. I mean, the completion percentage spoke for itself. I think I said, what, 65%?
Yeah. 65 is solid. I mean, you think about DJ this last year, he was less than 60%, Dylan, as
Right.
best I can recall. I think DJ was 57%. And that was the one thing about DJU this last year that, some of it sure was Oregon State's system. Some of it was the fact they only asked him to pass 12 times a game,
Right.
whatever it was. But regardless, that completion percentage was not quite what you wanted it to be. Usually that 60% mark is kind of the low barrier of sorts into being a really good quarterback. But going back to McCoy, I mean, obviously, Dylan, you and I just podcasted a couple days ago talking about the 10 signees that the Beavers had, and talked about local product Kalen Guttridge here from Wilsonville. He's obviously a guy that we talked about, another quarterback that they like that is probably going to be more of a developmental piece for a couple years, get into the system and kind of work his way up. Dylan, talk to me about why McCoy, if Oregon State doesn't attack the portal further, which we'll get to that in a minute, why he could be a quality starting option for the Beavers this next year.
I mean, the big thing we talked about on Wednesday was, production. It's a results business. Now you can say, yes, his numbers did take a little bit of a dip this year. 27 touchdowns, dipped down to 15 passing touchdowns.
Sure.
I'm not sure quite why that is. I didn't really get to watch the Idaho.
Yeah, can't say I watched a ton of Idaho, but maybe we'll have to sneak into some Vandal coverage to look at McCoy. But yeah, I'm with you on that.
I'm looking at their schedule. There was a couple blowouts there, so perhaps it was just maybe the running game was what was the better part of their offense to a degree. They did bring in Thomas Ford from Idaho, the running backs coach. But I think is he going to come in and be a elite quarterback similar to what Cam Ward did for Washington State? I don't know. Probably not. That's pretty high expectations to put on a kid. But you look at what he did, and what I see are traits that are very much translatable to the FBS and the FCS. Yes, the athletes are going to be better, but he is a smart decision maker. He does not throw a ton of turnover-worthy passes. He has a really high-quality arm. He's accurate. I mean, you look at his going back to his passing depths, 43% on the deep balls. I mean, in the FBS, that's about what you will expect to see from even some of the better quarterbacks in the country.
Right.
That's pretty impressive, and have no turnover-worthy passes on deep balls is very impressive. And this is a kid who also suffered. I'm looking at it right now, and this would make sense from why the stats aren't there this year. Let me do the quick math in my head here. Drops, he had still a lot. 10, 12, 13. He was the victim of 13 drops this year.
That's a lot of drops. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that can easily, 13 drops at 10 yards a pass. That's 130 extra yards. Who knows how many touchdowns? He was under pressure quite a bit still. As you just saw me count the numbers up, 85 times. Over 200, 300 passing attempts. But in the medium game, he was 63%. In the short passing game, nearly 80%. This is a kid who's accurate at all levels. I mean,
Right.
he's a smart decision maker. If you can be accurate and you can be smart, you have a good chance to be a really good FBS quarterback. And again, it's the production thing. This is a kid that 2 years ago was the Jerry Rice Award winner in the FCS. That's
He was.
not an easy award to win. Goes to the top freshman in college in the FCS. So yeah, I think it's definitely something that's translatable. I don't know if he's going to come in and light up the world, but I think
Sure.
he can come in and do you remember DJ stats at the end?
From this season, I mean,
Yeah,
DJ, I think, finished, like I said, it was about 57% completion percentage. Let me go ahead and pull up the official stats here so I don't butcher it. Threw for 2,600 yards, 21 touchdowns, 7 picks. Quarterback rating only an 80.8. So, again, that's where, was DJU great for the Beavers in what they needed him to be? Yes and no. Again, I still think it's important to parcel out kind of what the expectation was. And I think there were
right.
some Oregon State fans who expected DJU to come in and be Michael Penix or Bo Nix and just be
You're expecting him to find that 5-star talent at some point.
right. And I think DJ was good,
Sure.
pushing, really good at times, but I don't know if we ever saw the great, like that 5-star talent from DJ. Maybe a time or two. I know he had a really big game against Cal. That was a game that stands out to me. But with that all being said, those numbers, Dylan.
And you tend to look in the biggest games too, is when he probably struggled the most this year, which
Washington and Oregon, bad games
that,
for DJ.
well, and that's where you're going to be judged the hardest when you're a quarterback. I mean, he could throw for 40, touchdowns in 10 other games, but if he goes
Sure.
if 2 touchdowns to 8 interceptions those 2 games, nobody's going to care about the other 10. And that's fair. That's
fair. How much do you think McCoy's familiarity with potentially Ryan Gunderson? Obviously, McCoy went to Idaho out of college, but being a California guy there from Baldwin Hills, I believe, Ryan Gunderson, when he was being recruited, was at San Jose State and then got hired to go to UCLA.
Right.
I'm sure he was familiar with him. Do you think that was a big part of this too, Dylan, considering that or you mentioned Thomas Ford, maybe Thomas Ford had a piece of this too, because there obviously had to be some sense of offensive familiarity about McCoy's game from the coaches at Oregon State right now,
Right. Yeah, I think one of the key things there is, just being a local
Sure.
prospect, basically. It's not like this is obviously like Washington State, where Pullman and Moscow are like 10 minutes away from each other or something.
They're really close. They're like
yeah.
that. They're like
obviously it's what did I call it doesn't matter, but
they're all good, bro.
Obviously they're not that close, but still a Pacific Northwest talent. Sure. It's not that far away. I don't think they were watching film throughout the year being like, this is gonna be our dude, but I think it's a logical fit from California, obviously somewhere they recruit heavily. Gunderson, I'm sure, knew of him coming out of high school. I'm not sure exactly where Baldwin Hills is. That Southern Cal?
Yeah, I think that's Southern California. I can't say I've been. So that is it's in LA. So Baldwin Hills, suburb LA. That's
so another LA kid coming in here, which if you're gonna continue to build a pipeline to an area, build a pipeline to Southern California and Los Angeles is not a bad idea at all. But yeah, I mean, it comes from a place they recruit well. I'm sure Gunderson saw his film. He may have even canned at San Jose State coming out of high school, or he probably, I'm sure Gunderson saw him in some capacity coming out of high school. And, when you win an award like the Jerry Rice Award, you earn some more recognition. People know your name. I'm sure the coaching staff knew of him. And I'm sure if he entered the transfer portal this time last year, he would have been a much bigger name in the transfer portal.
Yeah.
And it's not even like he had a bad season. He just didn't have as great of a season as he did last year. But you look at what DJU posted for Oregon State this year, and I don't think it's numbers that he, can't match. Could he do better than them? Perhaps. But I mean, if he would be able to provide, considering the level of talent he is compared to on paper the level of talent that that theoretically has, I think a season like DJ posted would be more acceptable from a Javanni McCoy type standpoint than perhaps a DJ standpoint, because DJ was supposed to be that guy who he never was going to reach that 5-star potential, but come to Corvallis maybe was going to unlock something in, and who knows, maybe that was going to be year 2 if everything would have went right.
Right. And for what it's
But
worth, he still did up his stock. I don't know if Florida would have taken DJ after the last year. In a lot of ways, he was better at Oregon State than he was at Clemson. But like you said, there was that expectation, and probably unfairly so.
sure.
Hey, let's go. This is the Michael Penix and Bo Nix. And those two guys, I think, are very unique cases of guys being really, really good and 2-year transfers at their specific spots. But kind of wrapping up the point on McCoy again, as Oregon State lands Idaho Javanni McCoy to come in. He'll have 2 years of eligibility left. Will come in as a redshirt junior.
Right.
That's definitely going to add some competition to the room, Dylan. Let's go ahead and the deck again and talk a little about the rest of the quarterbacks and themselves. Like we mentioned, we're waiting to see ultimately what happens with Ben Gulbranson and Travis Throckmorton, the redshirt freshman on the roster right now. You wrote, keep an eye on those two guys as we work towards spring football, especially if they take another quarterback. 2 more quarterbacks, or rather, 2 that we've known they've been linked to have been Malik Murphy from Texas and then Gabari Johnson from Missouri. Dylan, set the table. Where do things currently stand with those guys? Does McCoy you out of the running for either of them? And what do you think is an appropriate timeline to expect? And I say that because last year, DJ, you announced on Christmas Eve that he was coming to Oregon State. So is McCoy it at quarterback for them, or do you think they're still keeping their finger on the button, looking to bring in at least one more guy?
Yeah, from all the intel we received, I think when it comes to those two, the most likely one is still Gabari Johnson to be a second quarterback for Oregon State in this transfer portal. That he was reported to have very high interest in. I think we received that intel last Friday on Gabari Johnson. That one, like, he entered the transfer portal and was like that. They're like, we got intel immediately that you may be muted, by the way, but that Oregon State was going to be a very high on the list of potential destinations for Gabari Johnson to ultimately end up at. And that was when, it was still quite clear that Oregon State was going to be in the transfer portal market for a quarterback, for a starting quarterback for 2024, including the names, Malik Murphy popping up. So I don't think I don't think this affects Gabari Johnson's recruitment. I still think there's a logical fit there. And I think, you bring him in and you let him and McCoy compete. You let those two compete. Johnson, I still believe, has 4 years of eligibility left. It's not like McCoy, who I think McCoy and Malik Murphy were probably to a degree, a one or the other type thing.
Sure.
And I'm assuming, based off what we know, based off the caliber of players there, that Malik Murphy was probably the top guy on the board. So I wonder if they received some sort of intel that suggests that Murphy is going to head elsewhere.
Right.
We know.
And what we've heard is it's pretty much Oregon State and Duke are like the two teams kind of been in the So that's something to keep an eye on in the coming days. And we talked about it on signing day. Like, transfers are a little bit different, Dylan. It's different for every school as far as when they have to get in. And specifically for Oregon State, I know that transfers have to, get in by the start of winter term, which, doesn't start for Oregon State until after the new calendar year. So the Beavers do have, some flexibility and some options. But I was just curious because obviously McCoy was a guy, like we said, one of the first quarterbacks we reported on our board, one of the first guys we had at BeaversEdge.com. And we knew there was going to be some interest there, but that's where I'd be curious to know for Beaver fans that are wondering, does this take them out of the running for Gabari or Malik Murphy? Sounds like those options are still open, with the emphasis probably being on Gabari Johnson. And that would make sense given that he is a native of Tacoma, just right up the freeway. You mentioned locality with obviously McCoy coming from California to Idaho to Oregon State. There's a great chance from what we've heard, Dylan, and obviously he didn't play at Missouri, so that's a part of it too.
Right.
But from what we heard, I think it's very easily safe to say Gabari Johnson was a little homesick and wanted to come back to the West Coast because,
Right.
didn't play at Missouri, was a kid from Washington, and he could end up being a nice little, addition for Oregon State should they ultimately get him. But then, like you said, let him go compete, and there could be two guys kind of duking it out for that starting quarterback job. Add in a third if Bengal Branson's still around. I mean, we still got to see how he plays the bowl game, Dylan. He could go up there and, light up Notre Dame and put up good numbers. And then we could say, well, is Ben back in the mix? And can Ben win you games against a largely Mountain West schedule? So lots of moving pieces still to get. Oh, go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say that's the other thing and it sucks, but it is what it is. If DJU would have came back for 2024, which I don't think there's anybody, but I don't think you can fault him for, leaving. I mean, this upcoming year is the most important year of his collegiate career, especially if he wants to get to the NFL. And at that point, you have to go where you trust that you're going to be able to, be developed. And if he ends up at Florida State, I mean, Jordan Travis was one of the best quarterbacks in the country this year. He was developed really well under that coaching staff. It sucks for Oregon State, it really does, but it is what it is. But if DJU came back this year against a largely Mountain West schedule, I'm sure he would have lit it up. He would have lit it up.
Stats, yeah. I've been like playing San Jose State in game 1 6 times. No different San Jose State, but that's like, DJ was against the lesser quality competition, as Dylan mentioned. Again, it's not a criticism of DJ, just an observation. He didn't perform as well as we thought he would have against Washington and Oregon. And those are the games he will probably ultimately be judged by here at Oregon State.
Right. But so I do think, Oregon State is going to be in a solid spot next year at quarterback. I think, you'll get Ben, you look at Javanni McCoy. One of those, I think both those guys can win you games against a largely Mountain West schedule. There's going to be struggles against Oregon, and I think they could beat Purdue. I don't know. I don't think that Purdue team is that good right now. There's a lot of kinks they have to worry out, especially offensively. But I think that's and defensively. But I think that's a team they can even beat. I mean, there's still high potential for this Oregon State team, considering what they still have to have returning, to be a 9-10 win team next year against a largely Mountain West schedule.
I mean, Dylan, you were just looking at the scholarship chart that we posted on Beaver's Edge this morning, and I know there's been a lot of doom and gloom from Oregon State fans, but considering that your competition took a step down, and again, I think Oregon State fans are a little kind of, gun shy, for lack of better terms, Dylan, because the last time a coach departed, Gary Anderson, when he quit and left and all that, the cupboard was so bare for Jonathan Smith that it was like, put up your hands. It's going to be, 2 years before you're competitive. And 2018 was a rough year.
And I know this is not what people want to hear, but we can talk for days about how everything went down. But the one thing that is absolutely 100% the truth is the program today is in an incredibly better spot than where it was when Jonathan Smith took over the program. People can, hate on how everything went down, but I mean, at the end of the day, he left Oregon State as a really damn good program. And like I've said on the podcast before, and I'm going to keep on hammering until I'm either right or I'm completely wrong. And that's that I think Oregon State has a chance to continue to be a really damn good program and be one of the top, whatever they're going to end up, whether we still call this the group of 5 or whatever.
Right.
Like the group of 5 is always going to have, I think, at least one representation in, the college football playoffs, and I think Oregon State, for the foreseeable future, as long as Trent Bray can continue the trends that were started under Jonathan Smith, I still think this program can be competing yearly, if not yearly, every other year or so, for a college football playoff spot. And I think, there's a lot of negatives about what has happened, but you could also argue that with everything that's happened, it puts almost the Beavers as a football program and solely as a football program in a better spot to potentially make a college football playoff,
Case for that.
which could also, eventually help recruiting. You know, the NIL stuff is getting, better and better. And as we've seen in college football, NIL is really changing recruiting. You look at Rivals, top 10 prospects in the country this year signed with 10 different schools.
Yeah.
First time ever that's happened in Rivals history. And that's not a stroke of luck. A lot of that has to do with NIL. Now, Oregon State obviously isn't going to be probably a player for most 5-star recruits, but the point remains is the NIL is going to help. Having sustained success is going to get you in those conversations for higher recruits and so on and so forth. Now, going back to the transfer portal, Gabari Johnson, the quarterbacks, kind of wrap that all up. Yes, Javanni McCoy probably changes things with Murphy, but I have a feeling that they probably had an indication from Murphy that maybe he was leaning towards Duke, or they had an indication somewhere that maybe he was leaning towards Duke. He was supposed to take a visit to Baylor,
Sure.
but I've heard he never made that visit.
Okay.
So that makes it Duke or obviously the Beavers. Now, perhaps he surprises us and he still commits
Right.
to Oregon State. Nobody's going to turn that down. I mean,
no. Guys can always change, and guys can change their mind, and they could get Gabari Johnson and Malik Murphy, and then Javanni McCoy could say, "I'm changing my mind and going somewhere."
Right.
Or we live in now, folks.
Right.
It is, what have you done for me lately? Kind of a business. And again, like I said, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this ultimately shakes out over the next, week or so. Make sure to stay locked into BeaversEdge.com, as Dylan and I will have the latest on McCoy and continued quarterback recruiting. Dylan, some final thoughts from you as we close out this edition of the Edge podcast.
Yeah. Okay. So still think they're in the run for Gabari Johnson, as we've stated. I don't think this really changes much just because of his 4 years of eligibility remaining. Well, if he does come in, then I would say you start looking closely in the spring at Ben and Throckmorton, just because I imagine they would like somewhere where they can have a chance to play, and I'm not sure that with Gabari Johnson, if Gabari Johnson does commit to Oregon State and Javanni McCoy, that they would, want to stay around, which is understandable. Obviously they signed Kalen Goodridge, but he is a project, as we've kind of discussed, that is going to have some development to go. Decisions you said. Timelines on that. If I'm correct, Oregon State's winter term starts January 8th. So I'm guessing their deadline for enrollment is probably the 7th.
Something like that, yeah.
So got about 3 weeks here for them to make a decision here. So still have a little bit. Now, what is worth noting is while it is a dead period currently, January 3rd through the 8th, I believe, is a quiet period for 2-year and 4-year transfers. So be sure to stay tuned over at Beaver's Edge because there is a chance that Oregon State is able to get somebody on campus, whether it's a quarterback or another position, to visit during that 4 or 5 day period. Now, obviously, it's a 4 or 5 day period and classes start the 8th. Enrollment deadline is probably the 7th. It is a very quick turnaround, obviously, so that if a kid visits, there's I don't know if I would say a high chance, but it would be, they would have to make a decision quickly because they'd have to move in within 24, 48 hours. So that would be something to watch going forward in the next few weeks. Other than that, it should be probably a little quieter. The team is preparing for the Sun Bowl, which is 6 days away. Obviously, Trent Bray is I'm sure he's traveling, but he's got some things he's going to be handling while the interim staff, I guess you can call it, handles the ball game as they've been doing all month. But yeah, they're still recruiting. They extended an offer last night to a JUCO kid, which I'll have more on the site soon. But I'm sure the recruitment, I don't know if I expect any high school commitments anytime soon. Perhaps there'll be active with the JUCOs here in the next few weeks. Those kids, I believe, can also visit that January 3rd through the 8th, since those would count as 2-year transfers. And then transfer portal, yeah, well, obviously they're still in the race for a couple guys. Will some people be willing to commit without visiting? Perhaps if there's past familiarity with Oregon State and Corvallis, but I would expect it to be on the quieter side probably over the next week or so until New Year's. And then once we get past New Year's, things will start picking up a little bit more. Oregon State, I'm sure, will be looking to add more to the 2024 recruiting class before the February deadline. Of course, we'll be waiting for Eddie Freehoff, Martin Connaughton, and Malachi Durant to make their final decisions on that after not signing during the early signing period. So while it will probably be quieter, there's still plenty to talk about it. We're going to be discussing a lot still on the recruiting side of things over at Beaver's Edge. So yeah, be sure to go over to OregonState.rivals.com. You could sign up right now with a free 30-day free trial. Get all the inside information. We're breaking down all the transfer portal commitments. After we're done with those, I plan on taking a look at the 2024 kids that are committed or signed at this point. And yeah, so still a lot going on over on the site here. And of course, we got the bowl game coming up in a couple days.
Exactly. And like Dylan said, there's no place you'd rather be, folks. BeaversEdge.com. It's going to be the best place for you guys to find all your Beaver coverage. As Dylan mentioned, we got the bowl game coming up. It's actually a week, a little, if you count today.
Not even 4 days. 4 days.
Not even. So yeah, the bowl game's coming up. It's going to be exciting to see the Beavers back on the field. Considering that the last time we saw them on the field, they were led by Jonathan Smith, and quite a lot has changed since then. And, all that to say, I'm very excited to see how they close out the season, and very excited to see who they attack in the transfer portal as well. I mean, going back to Dylan's point, DJU did not visit Corvallis before he came and signed and did all that. He was just like, it seemed like a place I wanted to go. So, it's anything's possible in that recruiting transfer portal game. And as Dylan mentioned, we'll be on top of it, especially with the quarterback news. Make sure to stay locked to BeaversEdge.com. We'll continue to come to you guys with podcasts following some big commitments or big transfers. Will be something we're going to try to do a little bit more often. So thanks for everyone for tuning into this edition of the Edge Podcast, breaking down the commitment of Javanni McCoy and also talking the Oregon State quarterback room. Big thanks to Dylan Callaghan-Croley. Dylan, this is probably the last time you and I pod before Christmas, barring another Christmas Eve decision from a quarterback, which, hey, you never know.
That's not a hint at anything or anything. Just
it happened.
Just joking around.
But happy holidays to you, man.
Yep.
I hope you have a good holiday weekend, and
to you.
A little bit of downtime for you just to enjoy the holidays and myself. And happy holidays to all of you all at Beaver's Edge. Dylan and I appreciate you guys so much.
Safe travels to anybody heading down to El Paso, of course, as well.
True, too. It is a journey to get down there, Dylan. So we are going to say safe travels to all the Beaver Nation that is. So again, for Dylan Callaghan-Croley and Brenden Slaughter signing off on this edition of the Edge Podcast.